do declare! This week's episode of Akame ga Kill rocked my jollies. You guys know that I'm a pretty big fan of action anime series. It tends to be my favorite genre. Well, this week's episode, my friends, freaking-livered. I loved this episode. It's easily my favorite episode of Akame ga Kill thus far, and that's what I love most about Akame ga Kill. It always manages to one-up itself in the action department. And this week's episode featured a number of great things. First, the main protagonist, Tatsumi. He's finally getting a little bit of progression and acting like the hero of the story. Not only that, but we finally get the epic confrontation and rematch between Mine and Seryu. Not only that, but there's a few surprise battles, like Tatsumi versus Suzuka of the Rakshaza Demons, and there's also one that I didn't see coming, which was Leone, Najenda, and Susanoo teaming up against Wave and Kuromi. And at the very end of the episode, Najenda finally one-ups Esdeath. And as weird as it is seeing my favorite leading lady in such dire straits, this was inevitably going to happen. The confrontation between the Jaegers and Night Raid has just been boiling over. And this week's episode was filled to the brim with lots of raw emotion and some incredible action sequences. So let's talk about some of the most badass ones. I think the one that everyone's going to remember the most is the battle between Mine and Seryu. The build up to it was very simple. It was basically just Tatsumi and Mine sneaking into the city, and they also start to throw in some small hints that they're definitely going to fall in love with each other, and that'll become very clear by the end of this week's episode. But they finally make their way to the outskirts of the city, and you see Seryu standing atop of this mountain, and she starts to use all of her weapons, which basically are just all of these cluster missiles and massive sniper rifle, and she just starts destroying this entire mountainside and castle, and this causes both Tatsumi and Mine to have to run away in this really great sequence where Tatsumi is using his Incursio armor, but eventually they do get separated, and that's when the individual battles begin. And just the intensity of Seryu is so disturbing, especially because at the very beginning of the episode, you get to see she does have a very nice side. She's hanging out with the kids. She'll kill you in your sleep, but she's great with the kids. The number of different weapons she uses is also just really impressive. It just starts out normal with guns and all that jazz, but then eventually she's using a massive missile, a giant ball and chain, and then towards the end of the episode, both her and Koro get to team up with each other. But the thing about Mine is she's actually got this weapon which allows her to fight when she's in a really desperate situation. Her weapon, the pumpkin, actually also runs on her raw emotions, and that actually gives her the edge in this battle. There's a lot of scenes where she's firing at Koro and just blasting him away, almost destroying his core. And then eventually it does get to this point where Seryu looks like she is taking over the battle, and there's a lot of great, really brutal hand-to-hand combat. But then eventually Mine is able to finish her off when she uses her pumpkin to use this giant beam weapon, which she literally uses to take down this entire mountainside and cut through Koro and Seryu at the same time. But Seryu is just like the Predator. She actually has this self-detonation bomb inside of her, which literally goes off almost like a nuke, and it looks like Mine is actually about to be killed. But going on the other side of this mountain is a battle between Suzuka and Tatsumi, and Suzuka has the upper hand at first. She's dodging all of his techniques and parrying all of them. She does this one move where she blocks one of his attacks and slams him into the ground that I thought was pretty badass. But eventually Tatsumi actually ends up using his environment to his advantage and uses the power of the Incursio armor to destroy everything around him, and basically this giant boulder just slams right down on top of her, and it's very dark and disturbing, especially for Tatsumi, but this actually gives him a chance to run over and save Mine at the last second, and he's holding Mine right there, and all I gotta say is, if I could quote Grandma's Boy, "Someone's ass getting laid tonight." At the very end of the battle, Tatsumi and Mine have a very nice moment together, and it's very obvious she's starting to fall for him. But honestly, the development they've had between the two, it honestly makes the most sense at the moment, and honestly, I can see them working together, and it's funny because I really hated Mine at the beginning of the series. I mean, I loathed her, but little by little, just seeing what she did in this week's episode has really made me appreciate her character all the more, just especially the drive she had at the very end of her battle with Seryu. Not to be outdone by Tatsumi and Mine, there was also a really surprising battle where Najenda, Leone, and Susanoo were teaming up against Kuromi and Wave, and this battle was very short-lived, and we probably haven't seen all of it yet, but I just loved it all, especially for that transformation sequence that was done by Wave. That was real flashy and badass. By the end of the episode, though, Esdeath is all alone alone in this room, and she's ambushed by Najenda, who's just hiding in the dark, and the only way you can see her is because she's illuminated by the cigarette she's smoking. She's so incredibly badass. And there's something that needs to be mentioned, and it's very obvious. The females in this show are hard freaking core. They are probably my favorite female characters I've seen in any series thus far. And we even get to see that both Lubbock and Akame are taking out everybody else, while Najenda is basically just getting ready to go up against Esdeath, ending this week's episode, which was badass. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Akame ga Kill? I loved it. You know that I loved it. I'm a big fan of action anime. This is a 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5, 100 out of 100 episode for me. I loved everything about it. The battle between Mine and Seryu was really well done, especially how they just kept changing up her weapons, just the amount of speed and explosions. There was just a lot of energy this week, and I especially loved that one hand-to-hand sequence where Seryu just went completely nuts. And I loved how they just kept changing up the animation, like when she was about to blow herself up, the animation of her face, which took on that hand-drawn, demon-like look, was very disturbing. And her actual death was surprisingly sad as well, especially when Koro was just like slowly crawling up to her and he was already destroyed himself, and they both go out in just a blaze of glory. But that's when Tatsumi comes in, and man, he just stands like a hero right there with his Incursio armor. I'm so glad that he got the Incursio armor, but yet it still reminds me that Bulat is gone, but, you know, he's sort of living through Bulat, and just, it was very clever how he came in, you know, saying that he didn't want any of his comrades to die, and obviously that's, like, the big moment, like, where their relationship is really getting ready to blossom, and she does seem like she wants to bring up maybe starting a relationship with him, at least that's what I imagine, but since they're in the middle of a battle and a mission, it would maybe compromise things, so she's going to decide to talk to him after all of this, promising, you know, that neither of them will die after this mission, and clearly this is just the beginning of something even bigger. I'm a little disappointed that the other Rakshasa demon was defeated so soundly. I thought maybe she was going to be slightly more important since they were holding her back, but it is what it is. She's just an underling, and she wanted to be punished by Esdeath. I mean, who doesn't? Even I'd want to be punished by Esdeath. Speaking of Esdeath, she was one-upped this week by Najenda, and that's actually a nice change of pace. I love Najenda. She's just a pure badass chick. She's so freaking awesome. Every single time she's in a scene, she just steals it with her amazing charisma. But there was also a lot of other fan favorite moments with Kuromi and freaking Wave coming in, even a little bit of Akame and Lubbock. So this episode was definitely really heavy on the action. Mostly for that whole Seryu versus Mine and the whole Tatsumi versus Suzuka scene. I really love how creative Tatsumi got by deciding to just destroy everything in that surprisingly dark battle. But really, it's all about Mine versus Seryu this week. That's going to be the thing that I think most people are going to remember. It had a lot of creative action sequences. It was done really well. And it's got me really pumped up for the rest of the series. So, I loved this episode. I'm giving it a 5 out of 5. You should check it out if you're a fan of Akame ga Kill or action anime series. You will not be disappointed. Thank you guys for watching my review. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And before you guys leave, please tell me what you thought about this week's action-packed episode of Akame ga Kill. Are you sad to see Seryu go? And what do you want to see from the rest of the Akame ga Kill anime series? If you haven't subscribed to our channel, you can do that by clicking on our channel icon right up here. You guys can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter.